Africa. So I'm really excited for this event that we have coming up. We've got Dale Wepener joining us. He is the Assistant Reserve Manager of Beyond Phinda Private Game Reserve, which has been rehabilitated to a pristine Big Five reserve over the last 30 years. So he works at the sharp end of conservation by protecting endangered species, gathering conservation shaping research, keeping open communication channels with local communities, and freely sharing that knowledge and learnings for the greater good of global conservation. So let's bring Dale in with us right now. Hey, Dale, how you doing today?
Good yourself, Joe. Thanks. Nice to see you all.
All right. Good stuff. Well, it's great to have you joining us. I feel like it was just yesterday that I saw you last when we were doing our test.
I think you're right.
Yeah, so we're excited to learn a little bit more about just what's happening with the conservation work at Phinda. It looks absolutely incredible. So I'm going to let you take over for a little bit.
Okay, let's just get the tech stuff sorted here.
There we go. All right. The tech stuff is always a little adventure in itself, I think.
Yep, that's for sure. Alrighty, let's get there. I think we're there. Are we right there? You're right there, Joe?
Okay, I think we'll have to try again. Okay. So if you hit the share option, then pick that first option for share screen. It should give you those kind of three options, and we want that entire screen. And we're going to click the little picture that of your screen under entire screen, and that should light up the share button for us.
Okay, share screen. Okay, little picture. Okay, there we go. Share.
Now we're cooking. There we go.
Okay, I think we're going. How does that look?
Perfect. We're good.
Okay. All right. This one. Okay, well, good day, everyone. Thanks, Joe, for the introduction there. I'm talking to you from South Africa, from northern KwaZulu-Natal, or more sort of warmly known as the heart of Zululand. And I'm part of the Phinda conservation team or the wildlife management team, if you want to put it that way. It's quite a strategic and practical role that I fulfill. And along with some of the points that Joe mentioned earlier about the shaping research and gathering conservation, we're always testing out a whole lot of new ideas, new concepts, and with it comes quite a few challenges. So that's kind of our role here. But yeah, very exciting, a whole lot of new stuff, and some good stuff on the go. Just to introduce you. Beyond Phinda is part of a much bigger organization or company called Beyond. We've been around for about 30 years. At the moment, we have lodges and camps in 3 different continents across the globe. And you can see the little map in the middle there. We've got Southeast Asia, we've got Africa, and then we've just recently, the last few years, gone into South America as well. It's basically a luxury travel company that also has a touring division to it. And it's reasonably big from an African point of view. We've got about just over 2,000 staff members. You can see on the slide there are 29 different lodges and camps. It's beyond the average luxury travel, and the idea behind it all is to create memorable travel experiences, but also transformational travel experiences for the guests that come and visit these fragile places that our planet has. And we have, there's a fair bit of impact that we have. We're impacting about 3,000 kilometers of coastline, 75 different communities surrounding the conservation areas that we operate in. And at the moment, we have impact over about 9 million acres of land. For those on the different system, it's about 3.6 million hectares, which is fairly large from a conservation point of view. So I just want to maybe introduce my little talk. We're just going to chat a little bit about a game reserve here. It's a 30-year undertaking so far, and the idea was to take defunct and quite unproductive farmland and restore it to as close to pristine wildlife habitat as it can be in modern times. And that's Phinda Private Game Reserve here. And it's now, over the last 30 years, this reserve is now a Big Five reserve. It's taken a lot of hard work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And at the moment, I mean, with regard in South Africa, there's been a lot of land restitution and stuff, and a lot of this reserve is actually community owned right now. That's also taken a lot of work and a lot of negotiations, and it's a successful model that we've found to be working at the moment. And when I say successful model, the financial side of these models is very, very important in order to maintain the sustainability of it. And over the years, we've learned some lessons, but at the moment, things are financially sustainable and stable. So, well, as stable as you can predict after COVID. But yeah, so that's where we are at the moment. Just to introduce you a little bit to and beyond and to Phinda as a game reserve. So we'll just move on to the next slide here. So here's an interesting statement there on the slide there. It says most travel companies choose to minimize the impact, but we're not most travel companies. So in and beyond, we have basically three main concepts or three ethoses that drive our company, it drives our staff, it drives our guest experiences as well. The first one is care of the land. The second one would be care of the wildlife, and the third one would be care of the people. They're not important in any. They're not more important than another in any different order, but they all play a very, very important role in making this these travel experiences sustainable and having maximum impact on these environments in a good way, and also maximum impact on the communities around the conservation areas. And then, as I said before, the transformational experience for the guests that come and stay with us is important. We want them to leave these natural areas, these fragile areas of our planet, having changed their mindsets to a much more sustainable way of living, or just a bit more educated as to what's going on in the world, especially from a conservation point of view. And the guests that come and support us, the revenue generated there, it leaves our world in a better place, and it's just a virtuous circle. A lot of the profits that are reinvested. Just to give you a few small examples of what's happening within the company, we've reduced our guest plastic water bottle usage by 100% over the last few years. So everything, we try to use as little plastic as possible. I mean, just over the operation of and beyond Nemba Island and the Vimizi Islands off the coast of Tanzania and Mozambique, we've had nearly 6,000 green turtles hatched there during the conservation period that we've been there. Over the years, we've given over 23,000 different conservation lessons to children in neighboring communities, mostly disadvantaged communities. So the educational aspect is incredibly important from our business model, And then, some of the areas in the conservation areas are reasonably, let's say, they can be poor areas, and access to basic sanitation and water and stuff is challenging. So, as we, a rough count recently, there's about 56,000 people that now have access to water and basic and decent sanitation services as a result of what and beyond has done in those conservation areas. Just to give you a sort of brief outline there. So moving on to sort of a bit more of the meat of what we actually want to chat about. We actually want to chat about Phinda Game Reserve, or Phinda Private Game Reserve there. You'll see that says the return. And that's it's quite important, that word, the return. It's the return of the wild places to areas that were previously agricultural. And in 1991, when this whole dream started by people that had a vision, certain people that had a great vision, this was basically a pineapple farming monoculture, and it wasn't particularly productive back then. There were cattle in the areas, sisal. There was some game in these areas as well, but mostly small game, the general kind of game that you may find on agricultural farms. But certainly no large game in this area at the time, besides maybe the odd roaming leopard. So the founding vision was to rehabilitate and reintroduce all the large mammal species that had originally lived in this region. And the original size of the land that Phinda started as was about 32,000 acres. That was the start. That is just under half of what we are at the moment. The reserve has expanded over the last few years, so the idea is working. During the agricultural period, this was a severely overgrazed and quite degraded area, quite unproductive. But as you'll start to see, the conservation side has really started to shine here in northern KwaZulu-Natal. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So today, as we stand today, within and beyond, Phinda is and beyond's flagship property. We have 6 award-winning luxury safari lodges on the reserve, delivering great guest experiences, transformational guest experiences. And it's basically, as we stand at the moment, it's a proven impact study that can be widely regarded as one of the world's sort of far-sighted and sort of successful blueprints for international ecotourism. And when we look back now, and as it is at the moment, Phinda is the home to countless different species of animals now, from the smallest to the largest. I mean, we've got just some examples. We've got the world's largest private herd of Inyala. It's an antelope we found down in southern Africa here. We've got thriving populations of cheetah at the moment, which was not the case 25, 30 years ago. And there was a lot of skepticism when they were introduced. We have elephant, we have rhino, we have lion, and all of those populations are of national significance in South Africa. And one of the reasons why these tracts of land were selected back way when 30 odd years ago is the habitat diversity in this area. I mean, we've got 6 distinct different habitats on the reserve, which allows for the biodiversity that you see when you come here. And we support an enormous population of birds, insects, a very well-known population of tree species. And in return and in conjunction to that, the animals that survive on that type of vegetation are quite significant. And there's an interesting sort of prophetic meaning to the word Phinda. Phinda is a Zulu word, and it actually means the return. So if you think about what's happened, the habitat here on Phinda has returned to its original state, almost to its original state, after 30 years of hard and consistent and dedicated work. The wildlife has returned to its rightful home. That includes some of the smaller species right up to elephant and rhino, black and white. As I chatted about earlier, the land ownership, as it is at the moment, is also being returned to its ancestral owners. And those processes are still ongoing. And the agreements are secure. And at the moment, they look very sustainable for the future. And the return of our guests year after year and the repeat business that we get from guests has allowed for this land to be protected and conserved. And it's basically, we all hope, going to be loved in perpetuity going forward. So that's where Phinda is at the moment. And we're going to get into a little bit more detail now as to what's happening on the reserve, just from a conservation point of view, and what we've done over the last 20 to 30 years. All right, so when we're looking at some of the animals here, these are the more spectacular species that you'll find on the reserve. And if you want to, you can read all of that stuff in the slides there. The dates go back to 1991, 92, 93. And maybe to start with, we can chat about lion to start with. And there's a lovely picture of a nice male lion just entering his prime of his life. And then there's a nice African elephant there and a cheetah on the bottom left, and looks like a white rhino bull on the bottom right there, a young white rhino bull. So, when Phinda was started, there was none of these large mammals here. It was basically just antelope species and little things like mongooses and some of the nocturnal wildlife that was left after hunting in those days and cattle farming and stuff like that. And, for the last 3 decades, the reserve has been meticulously and we trust and we hope expertly managed in order to maintain this biodiversity that we're looking for, and to promote the conservation ethics and the conservation of these animals going forward. The animal populations, it is a fenced-in reserve, as is most of the private reserves here in South Africa. And the animal populations, as a result, have to be managed. And the management here is responsible. And there's a very, very strong focus on genetic integrity amongst all the different species that we have. I mean, anyone would know that animals that are confined within the fence, no matter how big it is, any conservationist would realize that eventually they're going to start inbreeding. So there's quite a lot of movement of these different species in and out of the reserve to try and allay those effects. Just to give you an idea, I mean, we're only about 1/6 of the Masai Mara National Reserve in Kenya, for those of you that know that place. But we actually support about the same number of cheetah that they have there on a much smaller piece of ground. And we've got, along with that, we've got very high densities of lion, leopard. Hyenas are improving by the day, particularly the spotted hyena. And even occasionally we see the African wild dogs coming through the area from different neighboring reserves. They come and visit us from time to time. So maybe just having a look at lion. In 1992-93, 13 different lions were sourced from different prides, which is a kind of a groundbreaking move, in that, as people would know, lions are family animals, they're social animals, they need to know each other to live together. But these animals were introduced, and they were introduced to each other from different prides, and it was a successful process. And since then, more lion were added. But just to give you an idea, since the beginning, in 92-93, there's been, as at our count at the moment, our most recent count, we've had 288 lion cubs born on this reserve. And obviously there's been natural mortality, there's been moving off to other reserves in support of other conservation initiatives with regards to lion. And what is noteworthy in that statement is that the lion population on Phinda is second to the Kruger National Park from a genetic diversity point of view, which for us is very, very important. Lions, if they do start inbreeding, there can be negative effects on the population, as with many different species. So it's an important aspect to pay attention to. So, we've introduced lions to other countries as well, particularly Rwanda. And that was to try and to reintroduce lions into Rwanda after 15 years of local extinction. After the 1994 genocide, the lion populations, particularly in Akagera National Park, took a major hammering, and a lot of animals were poisoned by cattle herders and stuff, a lot of the lions. But Beyond Phinda took part in reintroducing lions into Akagera, and at the moment they have a population of 36 lions in Rwanda, in Akagera. So that's been a successful reintroduction of a large predator across borders into another African reserve. So we can have a look at cheetah, the next one there. The initial population of cheetah that was introduced into Phinda came from Namibia, because cheetah at the time were not easily available in South Africa. And you can see there were 12 in 2 different groups. And Phinda nowadays is widely regarded as having one of the most important genetically diverse and predator savvy cheetah within the private fenced reserves in Southern Africa. and even taking into consider some of the national parks as well. Our cheetah population has done exceptionally well. And when we talk about predator savvy, that's very, very important because they are vulnerable to being killed by some of the other bigger predators, including lion, leopard, sometimes even spotted hyena. So when cheetah were introduced into Phinda, it was done before the introduction of lions. So the cheetahs could establish their home ranges, get their territory sorted out, get to know their environment, and start working on this predator savviness that we talk about before the lions were introduced. So it gave them a little bit of a helping hand in getting themselves established. So as a result of that, as we stand at the moment, just to give you some stats on the cheetah here at Phinda, we've had 63 different litters born, and possibly even a few more that we may not have seen. And that's equating to very close to or just above 200 different cheetah cubs born here on Phinda over the last 25, 30 years. That's, I think, in anyone's book, you could look at that and see that's a successful reintroduction project. And the important part about that is not so much as that we can sustain cheetah here, is that we can then move these genetically diverse cheetah because they came from Namibia and they were not particularly linked to the meta population in South Africa. We can then move these cheetah to other reserves and start new populations within South Africa. And even internationally, we've moved some cheetah to Malawi, to Lwandi, and it was the start of a population there as well. A dominant breeding male was moved from Phinda to Malawi, and he has since mated with females there, and they have had cubs, successful raising of those cubs. So the cheetah population, even though if you came to Phinda, you would look at the environment, and it's not quite the same as the Serengeti or the Masai Mara, is where the what you would think of cheetah living in that type of habitat. Our habitat here is quite thick, it's quite dense, but the cheetah have done exceptionally well here and breeding prolifically, as long as they don't come into contact with too many lions. But they seem to be pretty savvy at the moment, and they seem to be managing. Alrighty, so talking about elephants is always an iconic species to have on a Big Five reserve. I mean, you're not much of a big game reserve if you haven't got an elephant or a couple of elephants. The introduction of elephants also started around 1991, and that was also in a way controversial, groundbreaking introduction of elephants into a game reserve where 37 orphan youngsters were relocated onto the reserve, and they were basically the orphans from the old culling programs, the national parks culling programs. And if you had read any of the documentation, those animals were sometimes slightly traumatized, not really socially adapted to each other, but they were introduced to Phinda, and they started to form their little social groups and their herds. Not too long after that, 4 adult animals were introduced from Zimbabwe in 1993, and that started creating a much more stable social platform for the elephant families and the matriarchal development, the development of the dominant bulls in the area, and started stabilizing the elephant populations quite nicely. So by 1995, the first calf was born on Phinda, conceived on Phinda and born on Phinda. And the elephant herd at the moment is breeding so well that occasionally the females get contracepted, which is a accepted practice in game reserves here in South Africa, particularly fenced-in game reserves. And it's a non-invasive process, and it just helps to control the growth rate of the population, which, if left unchecked, can easily outgrow the ability of the habitat to support them. So, from initial 37 animals, in our last count, which was pretty recently, we're sitting at 121 different elephant here on the reserve. And amongst that are some quite noteworthy animals, which we can discuss a little bit as well just now. With regards to rhino, that's also a very, very important species, white and black rhino. That bottom picture there, the bottom right-hand side, there's a white rhino. You can see by the square lip there. The initial introduction of rhino into Phinda was also in the early 90s, and 21 rhino were introduced into the reserve from a neighboring reserve. At the time, it was the largest relocation of rhino to a game reserve, and they were mainly white rhino. And a significant development in 2004 was Phinda being selected to be part of the WWF Ezemvelo KwaZulu-Natal Wildlife Black Rhino Range Expansion Project. Some of you might know it as the BREP project, where we received an initial amount of 15 black rhino, a population of 15 animals. Those animals have since significantly increased in number, to the point now where the reserve is of the ability to release those animals to start up other populations in other reserves. The white rhino population from the initial 21 has grown to hundreds. We can't give out the details completely, as everyone's aware of the rhino situation in South and Southern Africa. But both populations have bred exceptionally well. They've adapted to the habitats here, and yes, so that's also a great milestone for this reserve, from a reintroduction point of view. Okay, so that was the early years and until sort of where we've got to now. Let's move on to the next one. So just from an elephant point of view, if you look on the right-hand side of the slide there, or let's look at the top left-hand side, there's a very big elephant bull that's been immobilized there, ready for translocation. And just recently, we introduced some very large Tuskers elephant bulls from Tembe Game Reserve, which is just near the Mozambican border, just north of us. It's one of the last populations of large elephant bulls, Tuskers, left in Africa. And the idea behind it was we were very fortunate in being able to secure these animals. We introduced 2 large Tuskers, and the idea behind it was to spread that genetic population a little bit. And also from an ecotourism point of view, it's a fantastic thing to see one of the last, well, not one of the last, but one of the large Tuskers in Africa, in KwaZulu-Natal. Not everyone goes to Tembe, but we get a lot of international guest traffic here at Phinda. So to be able to see some of these elephants is quite special. There's also some pictures of some creatures on the right-hand side there. Some of you will recognize them as being pangolins. We've partnered with the African Pangolin Working Group in recent years, over the last few years, and we've been reintroducing pangolins into Phinda that have been captured from the illegal trade of pangolins, and it's one of the most trafficked animals in the world. They often get seized in sting operations, and then go to the Johannesburg Wildlife Veterinary Institution, and there they get treated for any dehydration, malnutrition, or any conditions they may have developed while being in captivity or being in the illegal trade. Some of the conditions that they live in are horrific prior to being poached or prior to being sold. And so these pangolins, if they can't be traced to their original origins and put back into their original areas that they roamed in, are introduced into Phinda. There's a soft release process that we take part in, and yes, it's also been once more a very successful project. We've had over 15 pangolins introduced into Phinda. They're starting to become wild now, in that the fact that we don't have to track them all the time and monitor them. So the population itself is starting to establish itself here, as well as us having 2 births of young pangolins, which we believe were conceived here on the reserve. So that's a very exciting project that's been going on here for the last few years. A lot of field work, a lot of long hours, a lot of challenging environments, but these scaly creatures are getting a foothold here in northern KwaZulu-Natal after being absent from this environment for at least between 40 and 50 years. And also, going back to elephants again, we've subsequently brought in 4 young elephant bulls from Tembe as well to add to the genetic makeup here on Phinda, as well as a small breeding herd of 8 animals. So we have great hopes for expanding that genetic population from Tembe, which was quite isolated, due to the natural migratory corridors of elephants being broken up by human settlements. And we're looking forward to the future growth of those herds and seeing some more tuskers in this area as well. I mean, other animals that we're also introducing just recently, we've got black and side-striped jackals that we're introducing periodically from time to time. Bushbuck klipspringers from an antelope point of view. So the process is continuing. We haven't stopped, and we're going to continue going forward. Alrighty, so let's move on to another one here. Just going back to lions a little bit. When we spoke about Akagera a little while ago, about lions, sadly the big cats there had become locally extinct about 16 years ago, following the genocide. And we took part in relocating some of the breeding females back into Akagera. And it's been, once again, a successful breeding project for them. They have tourists and guests coming to visit those lions there and having regular sightings of those lions. We also know from feedback that they have bred, and so there are cubs in the area, and so that lion population is also taking off, which brings, it's heartwarming to all of us. As human expansion carries on, the habitat for lion and big predators is shrinking by the day. And to be able to introduce these animals into habitat where they can survive and be protected is a great step forward. And we've also helped to introduce lion population into Mozambique. There were 11 animals that went to one of the conservation areas in Mozambique a few years ago. Also in other Southern African reserves in the Eastern Cape, other reserves in KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga area, the Northwest, and Limpopo, all different provinces. We've been moving lions around from a genetic diversity point of view as much as we can, and they're in demand from Phinda because of the genetic diversity. So just give a little bit of a brief chat about the lions that are here on the reserve. Alrighty, so let's move on to we've gone back to cheetah a little bit. You can read for yourselves there. There's only about 7,100 cheetah left, adult cheetah left in the wild. 89% of their natural historic range has been lost due to human encroachment and habitat loss. But as we chatted about earlier, we've had over 200 different cubs, or 200 cubs born here on the reserve. Most have survived. Some have fallen prey to other predators, which is a natural process. But in 2017, the Endangered Wildlife Trust expanded its borders for the first time, and we introduced cheetah into Lwandi, like we chatted about earlier. And there was a virile and very productive male that went that way, and he seems to be doing very well up there. So since 2011, because initially the cheetah population in Phinda had to establish itself and start breeding properly, but since 2011, 57 different cheetah have been introduced into new reserves in South Africa mostly, or Southern Africa, and that has aided in ecotourism, but also aided in the genetic dispersal of the animals from Phinda here to new places. All right, so and then we're going to go back to Rwanda there a little bit there. This is a recent project that And Beyond Phinda took part in collaboration with the Rwandan Development Board and African Parks, and funded by the Howard Buffett Foundation. So once again, Phinda has come full circle here, and we're reintroducing rhino into local extinct areas in Africa. And this was a collaboration, a project, a partnership that took place back to send rhino back into Rwanda. And as far as we know, it was the largest translocation of rhino ever attempted, where 30 breeding animals left Phinda Game Reserve and headed for Rwanda. And that was a real privilege to be part of an operation like that. To be able to send these animals to Akagera and to get the feedback from Akagera about how well they're doing there, how well they've adapted to the environment. And the fact that we've had calves born, or Akagera in Rwanda has had calves born since the introduction of these animals just a year ago. So, to be part of that, it's a great privilege to be part of a move like that. It's an incredible amount of logistics, incredible amount of planning, an incredible amount of preparation, quarantining animals, getting customs clearances, veterinary permits to get animals out of the country. And to just hear that they've been established in a new game reserve, or not a new game reserve, but a new population in a game reserve, and that they are breeding successfully is really something to be, well, we feel that, well, I feel it's be proud to be part of, just from a logistics point of view, there had to be incredible efficiencies involved there from an animal welfare point of view. From, just to give you an idea, from when the first animal was immobilized for the transportation from South Africa to Rwanda, they were released into their release bomas in Akagera in just under 48 hours. That involves all of the immobilizations, loading into transport crates, onto trucks, traveling to international airports, clearing customs, veterinary permits, loading onto aircraft. A very large aircraft was used. Loading all of the animals at one time onto an aircraft takes hours. And then the flight up there, the offloading off the aircraft back onto trucks to the capture bomas again for release. Those animals were grumpy, and that can be understandable, but they've adapted and they've all survived, and that's been a great success from a rhino relocation project. All right, so okay, so let's move on to the next one here. Just an idea of what, just where and beyond wants to go in the future. We're looking at scaling up, and that's in the vision. From just under 9 million acres, we want to scale up to about having 50 million acres of impact in the environment. And the broad scaling impact vision is to have at least by 2030, 25 million acres of land under direct and beyond management from a conservation point of view and from a community development point of view. And then at least another 25 million acres influenced by our impact coalitions, whether it's communities or partnerships with other conservation organizations, and that we're hoping to have had done by 2030 as a goal. And once again, empowering and creating shared values with surrounding communities is very important to us from a conservation point of view. And going back to financial models, I mean, this type of expansion obviously takes money. And we're looking at doubling the revenue generated by the company, and tripling profits by managing the business more efficiently. And anyone that just went through COVID, especially from a tourism point of view, has realized that efficient business is just a no-brainer. Cost cutting and clever decision making has to be made in order to keep these businesses floating and sustainable. So we're looking to continue delivering those extraordinary guest experiences, those transformational experiences, and changing the way people look at the world, And, we don't want to cost the earth from an impact point of view. We actually want to impact in a positive way and do as little destructive impact as humans are very prone to be doing as possible. So that's just a very quick sort of overview, a very quick look at what is happening here at and beyond Phinda Private Game Reserve here in northern KwaZulu-Natal. And thank you all for listening, for those that did. And we are on social media. We are on the net. You can go to www.andbeyond.com. We have an impact review, which is a very interesting read. And we also have an informative podcast called Leave Our World a Better Place that you're welcome to listen to when you can. I think that about wraps up what I was going to say. And I'm open to questions if anyone would like to have any questions, and I'll answer them the best I can.
All right. Well, Dale, thank you for that awesome presentation. The scale of the work that Phinda is doing is just amazing, and those examples of those
Thank
reintroductions
you.
and success that you and the team have been having are just first class. That's absolutely amazing. So, Dale, what led you to conservation in the first place?
Well, it's having grown up on a farm and in a sort of rural environment, you realize very early in your life that if we can't look after our world and if we can't leave it a better place, what are we actually achieving? The resources on this planet are finite, and you know, it's a drive inside you. If you're that way inclined, is to get into conservation and you know, you know rehabilitate these habitats, reintroduce these animals, and just make a difference where you can. And if everyone just makes a little bit of difference, we're definitely going in the right direction.
Yeah, I can imagine the job of a conservation. It's ups and downs, really high moments, and then yeah, really low moments too.
Yeah, no, that's a very true statement. We have some really heartwarming moments and some real successes. Um, but then you also have your challenges, and those challenges we just got to take. We've got to take them straight on the shoulder, and then wake up another day just to carry on. But but overall, it's a very fulfilling type of work to be doing, and it's a real privilege to be in this industry.
Yeah. And then, you mentioned so many components of this protection and what it does for the community. I imagine you probably employ a lot from the community as well.
Yes. Now, most in pretty much all of and beyond's operations, and particularly around Phinda here, we've got very strong relationship with the local communities. There's 5 communities surrounding the reserve, and there's constant dialogue between the different communities and the management of the reserve and the executive management of the company. So, more than 80% of the staff that we have working here on the reserve come from these local communities. And that ranges from skilled workers to unskilled labor, which is also very important. And that's making a huge impact in just keeping these families going outside. Often these areas are quite impoverished. Resources are very limited. It can be that a single breadwinner can be supporting up to 20 others in the family. So it's one of the objectives of employment in these areas.
All right. Well, Dale, I'm going to share the link one more time here, nbeyond.com, to dive in more, find
That's
out
it.
more about not only Phinda, but the network around the world, which is pretty unique. And I mean, Dale, the work is going so successful right now. A huge goal of 25 million, then 50 million
It's
uh,
big. Yeah.
influence. I mean, wow, that's judging by what's been done so far. I think you've got a good shot at it.
No, thanks very much. It's a challenge. There's no doubt about that. But if we can just keep everything sustainable and we keep changing those hearts and minds about what we're doing in the world, I think those goals can be reached. It's definitely an achievable target.
All right. Well, Dale, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for your team behind the scenes who helped make this possible. And
Thank you.
I hope you have a great rest of the day and an awesome World Biodiversity Day tomorrow.
Yeah. No, thanks very much. Thank you, Joe, for all your help, and thank you to all that have listened.